Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Acumen's Webinar Wednesday. My name is Stephen Phelps, and I will be your host for the Sales Tax Guide for Sage Software. Today, we brought in Joel, Brian, and Rose from Avalara to chat about economic nexus and how it affects sales tax across state lines. And once we provide more insights into managing your sales tax obligations, then we'll dive deeper into a demonstration of Avalara's solution. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, then please write them in the chat box and we'll answer near the end of the presentation. Let's get started. So I will now pass it on to Brian and Joel.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Brian Gavin. I'm one of the Sage consultants here at Avalara. I work everything Sage. I've been with Avalara for 3 years now. And prior to that, I worked at ADP for 15 to 16 years. The reason why I always like to share that prior experience is for anybody on the call that does outsourcing of payroll. It's a very, very similar concept, as we'll explain to you in the upcoming slides. And we really appreciate everybody joining the call today. And I'll kick it over to Rose for her introduction.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Rose Twait. I'm a senior product solution engineer here at Avalara. I've been with Avalara for almost 12 years. I've worked in various roles within the company, but I've always been strategically focused on making sure that we have the right products and services for what our customers and partners' needs are. So I'm really excited to lead the demonstration portion of our meeting today. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. And we'll just jump right into the agenda for today. So the agenda today, we're really going to give a nice high-level overview of sales tax, really discuss the current state of business, a lot of conversations that happen on most of our calls with a lot of our Sage customers, discuss some best practices and paths to compliance, and then leave it open to question and answers at the end. So really what we want to do first is, like I had mentioned, jump into a sales tax overview. Most of my initial calls really have to do with two subjects. It really comes down to compliance and it comes down to automation. But we always want to address compliance first. It's one of the reasons why businesses look to Avalara. And it really comes down to sales tax nexus. And a lot of the calls that we have, our introductory calls or discovery calls, are really educational around that connection between a seller and state that require the seller to register, then collect and remit sales tax in the state. So really understanding the differences between physical nexus and economic nexus. And as many of you may know on the call that really monitor that in-house, the thresholds vary significantly by state. So that's what we'll kind of discuss a little bit moving forward, just from an educational standpoint around sales tax nexus. And then if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll keep this really informal and educational. Next slide. So really when we're talking about Nexus, we're talking about, that impact decision of South Dakota and Wayfair. So as you're probably aware, 2 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that the states require businesses to collect sales tax based on sales volume rather than just physical presence. Clearly, none of all the states that have sales tax have enacted their own laws. These laws have affected manufacturers, distributors, and highly exempt sellers in a big way. And when I'm dealing with Sage customers, I am dealing with a lot of manufacturing and distribution and dealing with a lot of exemptions of sales. So, when I speak with businesses every day, they have yet to review the laws and determine where they might be required to register, truly to understand if they need to add new states to their portfolio of tax filing, of tax returns that they need to file. So truly, that one bullet point there, exempt sellers must prove they didn't owe sales tax in states where they've triggered Nexus. So we really help businesses when it comes to tracking Nexus and keeping you compliant with Nexus. So Nexus creating activities, you see some on there, one of the ones that pops out and happens on a lot of our tax debrief calls is trade shows, not being aware that just attending a trade show, not even selling something at a trade show can truly trigger Nexus. A big one for a lot of my Sage customers is drop shipments. A lot of businesses that deal with different drop shipments didn't realize that they've impacted their Nexus thresholds in other states. A big one, obviously, is online sales. So any e-commerce, when you are selling, we figure, during the pandemic, how many businesses really shifted to an e-commerce kind of model in their sales, and really how much that has triggered Nexus. So even though Wayfair happened, quite a few years ago, I'd say 90% of my introduction calls of Sage customers and referred customers from Acumen, it's really saying, hey, we're not really sure where we have Nexus, and that's where we want some help. And then really seeing how we're able to automate that whole process so you're not having to track that in-house. So these are some of the examples of how, some activities of your business can create Nexus. So when we talk earlier about economic nexus and the thresholds by state, you can see there on the screen that it varies significantly. We have some states that do it just by the dollar amounts, some states that will do it by dollars and transactions, some states that'll do it by dollars and or transactions. So it is really important to understand that, 45 states have adopted economic nexus laws since that Wayfair decision, and the thresholds vary significantly by state. And again, a lot of my introduction calls really come down to people realizing that, hey, this is just a little too complex for us to do in-house and manage and monitor. So that's why we're looking to Avalara to keep us compliant and not only automate the whole process, just making sure that we're doing everything properly. And we do that by doing sales tax risk assessments, by really looking at the current state of the business. So when we're talking about, looking at Nexus and looking at all the laws, we really need to look at the jurisdictions. There's over 12,000 different US jurisdictions for sales tax. There's over 152 million addresses and millions of product and service exemptions. That's a big one with my Sage customers. It's whether, what you're selling or what services you're providing may impact significantly what that Nexus law is and how it impacts basically you being compliant with Nexus. So when we really take a look at, how complex it is with all of those jurisdictions, as you may know yourself, we are looking by the specific address to make sure if there's any significant challenges that you might face. One of the things that really comes up a lot on my introduction and discovery calls, especially with Sage customers dealing with so much exempt business, one of the misconceptions is that, hey, most of my sales are exempt, so I don't deal with sales tax. A lot of you business owners might have, 80, 90% exempt sales where you're filing a lot of minimal returns or zero returns. And if you are looking to be 100% compliant, that's where we're able to assist. It's really not so much the tax determination that a lot of my Sage customers are looking for. They're basically saying, we've either had an audit or we want to be audit ready with our exemption certificate process because we have not been doing a great job at it. A lot of my businesses that I work with from experience will only be collecting in states that they're registered in. And as they start creating Nexus in other states, they realize that they needed to start going backwards and collecting certificates in states that they're newly getting registered in. So this has really had, a big effect on manufacturers and just making sure you're compliant in collecting the proper certificates and validating that they are the correct certificates. And not only that, managing them to make sure that you're collecting up-to-date certificates as well. So when we kind of dig a little bit deeper into the next slide, is it a tax-exempt sale? Avalara is really assisting you not only with the economic nexus threshold piece of it to make sure that you're compliant, but, that specific tax exempt sale, is it product-based? Is it use-based? Is it entity-based? Is there an exemption certificate required? Are we validating and making sure that that is the correct exemption certificate? And as you'll see on the next slide, this is a slide that I share all the time on my introduction calls, again, to be very informative that, you look here and about, call it 60 to 70% of the states in the US that are in orange there consider exempt sales a part of Nexus thresholds. So when a lot of new prospective customers come to us and complete risk assessments, it really helps them identify that they have triggered Nexus in other states. A statistic from 2022 showed that anybody that did a risk assessment with Avalara, it came back that about 2 or 3 states the business should get registered in that they were not previously registered in. And for most of my Sage customers, it is truly around exempt sales. So as we really look into managing that compliance, one, we really like to take a look at, when we are doing a risk assessment outside of physical presence, is really taking a look at, one, not only economic nexus, but we really are making sure that whether you've been managing that in-house, if we are properly looking at product taxability, jurisdiction alignment, the managing and storing of your exemption certificates, making sure that, we are registered in any local municipalities if we need to, and most importantly, having everything audit ready when it really comes to not only Nexus, but your exemption certificates. So, how high is the audit risk? I mean, a lot of experience that I get from auditors, or excuse me, from customers that do go through an audit, especially Sage customers that deal with so many exempt sales. An auditor walks in, and one of the easiest things that they ask for when they see all of these exempt sales is, let me see the exemption certificates. So 60% of audits are really targeted toward manufacturing, wholesales, distributor, retail, which is primarily all of my Sage, client base. And most common mistakes are truly not being registered in proper states for economic nexus, especially where you have exempt sales, and not collecting the proper exemption certificates, and not only collecting them just from the start, but making sure that in certain states they do expire every year or two, and you are collecting those certificates. So we really try to help businesses to avoid any, penalties and fines, and really help prepare them for any audits that they might face. So in the upcoming, really share with you, our best practices and how Avalara is really able to help with that path to compliance on making sure that you are compliant with Nexus. So up on the screen, you see 3 options. We have the basic assessment from Avalara. That's a risk assessment that you could go to avalara.com and do yourself, but it doesn't really go that in depth. We do have 2 other options, which is our full or premium risk assessment. Now, if any of you have done a risk assessment for your business in the past or worked with another third-party CPA, you know that those costs that are shared on the screen are actually very competitive compared to what CPA firms will charge for risk assessments. So when it says $4,500 or $8,500, last year, Avalara decided as a courtesy to start extending our full risk assessments at no charge to our Sage customers. So everyone that's attended this call, you are able to take advantage of that courtesy. It is one of our full standard risk assessments. It is going to truly be a self-guided questionnaire that is going to walk through operations of your business, how you go to market, what it is that you sell, what it is that you service. I always like to share with my customers, I'm not putting a huge homework assignment on your plate. It literally can be completed in a day, as long. The great things about these risk assessments is you're not, one, tied to Avalara for anything. 2, this report goes nowhere. It is for so that to identify where you have created Nexus in other states outside of where you're currently registered. So there really is no cost. And the best benefit of that courtesy risk assessment is having a debrief with one of our tax directors that will walk you through the findings, answer questions about why you triggered Nexus in those particular states, and then make recommendations on how to get compliant. And Avalara handles compliance. That is one of the things that really separates us from any other sales or use tax companies or CPA firms out there, is that we handle all of our own compliance work when it comes to registrations or possible voluntary disclosures. So just to reiterate again, anyone that is attending this call, I always like to share that courtesy risk assessment really is a no-brainer for you to understand, hey, do we have everything covered for Nexus? Are we registered where we need to be, crossing all our T's and I's? And maybe taking the risk assessment is identifying even if you should continue having a conversation with Avalara. A risk assessment could come back and share with you that you're doing everything compliant, no state, or it could come back with a few other states, and now you might want to look to outsource it with a payroll company when you start to venture into that many more states. So on the next slide, I really share kind of that path of the process and timeframes, because it's a lot of time that come up. So when our customers complete the straw, that's the standard risk assessment. When they complete it in 1-2 days, that report comes back instantly within 24 hours, showing you where the states that you need to get registered are if you've created Nexus in other states. Then I reach out to you and schedule a call with our tax director to walk you through that report and answer those questions and hear his recommendations. Simultaneously, while we are doing risk assessments to cover the compliance subject, we are also looking at automation during that discovery process and going through some questions with myself about the business. And when businesses decide to move forward, we're typically looking at a 75 to 100-day process of moving forward on once you decide if you wanted to move forward with automation. And then as part of the compliance work, if there's any voluntary disclosures or registrations we need to do for the business, we do that during the setup process too. So we're getting you completely compliant before we ever even go live. On the next slide, it really just shares with you what the flow looks like on how everything operates with Avalara. So Avatax is our tax engine, and that determines and calculates tax. So we integrate directly into Sage 300 and Sage Intacct. So we replace the native function of Sage with Avatax, our tax engine. So you no longer have to upload any tax tables or rates. You're making those tax determinations split second in your invoicing system. And we also are able to tie that into e-commerce shopping carts like Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, etc. And for a lot of my Sage customers that have a lot of exempt sales, when that determination comes through, is this a taxable sale? And does the business have Nexus in this state? That secondary software, which is called ECM, which manages all of your exemption certificates, is truly where we're going to manage, store, and track your exemption certificates. But also in that split second, it's going to identify if we have an exemption certificate on file for that customer. And if it's a new customer, we send a link out, which is called Cert Express, and it is a very digitized process. All of this with collecting your exemption certificates and managing them. And by being tied into all of this with your tax engine and the exemption certificates and collecting all of this data, we're able to file and remit your returns just like a payroll company does. One of the things that, oh, sorry, Joel, to the next screen, please. One big thing that comes up on a lot of calls is SST, the Streamlined Sales Tax Program. And Avalara is one of 5 companies that's a certified provider of the SST program. Many calls that I do with accounting departments and controllers or CFOs are aware of this program, but I like to share it. And I like to break it down very simplified on what SST is. In the late 90s, a group of 24 states got together and basically said, let's make it easy and attractive for business owners to move forward and get registered for 2 reasons. One, a lack of knowledge, not knowing that they needed to get registered in that state, and especially because of the Wayfair and new economic nexus laws. They're aware that some businesses are not aware that they need to get registered. And 2, sometimes businesses are just gambling with risk exposure and not sure if they should get registered or kind of waiting for someone to, send a letter or notify them. So how do we this program was to incentivize business owners to get registered and move forward. And basically on the next screen, it really explains what the incentives are for being in the streamlined sales tax program. So first, in order to qualify in these states that are highlighted, these 24 states that are highlighted on the screen, there's 3 qualifications it breaks down to. One, as long as we have no fixed place of business. So if it's not your headquarters location and you are registered in one of these states, you're able to be qualified as a volunteer seller. The second qualification, as long as you don't have any inventory, $50,000 of property in that specific state. And the third one is if you don't have any payroll or employees in that state. So with that said, and all of these states kind of look at it a la carte in a sense. You don't have to qualify in all 24. And I assist my customers in doing the analysis to see if they qualify for this program. This makes us very competitive against a lot of payroll companies sales tax companies, because once you're qualified in these states, the benefits of the SST program are, one, you don't have to pay for registrations into that state. Avalara is reimbursed by the state from this program for the cost of registering in that state. 2, the biggest incentive, especially for monthly filers, all of the returns that are due in that state, and also keep in mind, if you are an exempt seller and filing 0 returns, are at no charge from Avalara. Through this program, the state reimburses Avalara for the cost of your returns. And then lastly, any of the API calls, the transaction calls where you're looking to Avalara for the tax determination on your invoice, are voided from those invoices. We back out all of the tax determinations that happen in that state based on how our pricing model works. So there are times where I have customers that really only have employees, physical location, and inventory in 1 or 2 states, but sell across all of the US, that I'm able to qualify them in this program. And by qualifying them in this program, it really helps keep the cost, make it cost effective and keep the cost of Avalara and outsourcing down. This is a big education topic when I am on my discovery calls, and I always look forward to looking into each individual business's current state of the business and seeing if they are a good fit for this program. On the next slide, this basically shares with you our heat map. So when you log into Avatax, which Rose is going to share with you shortly, on your landing page, you're going to have a heat map. And in this example here, this customer, this is showing in orange all of these states that this customer is filing and remitting sales tax in currently. And then it shows the example over to the right there that in Alabama, that this customer is approaching Nexus at 88% of the threshold. So not only do we track the states you file and remit in, but real time, we are tracking economic nexus and all other transactions into other states. And once you've crossed 80% of a threshold, that is when Avalara is going to notify you that you're approaching nexus in that state. And once that state lights up that neon orange, Avalara orange, it's going to let you know that you've triggered Nexus in that state. And once you've triggered Nexus in that state, it allows you to get registered in that state moving forward for a very minimal cost. On this next slide is the exemption certificate management. So this is truly where we had spoken before, and Rose is going to share a little bit with you on the demo about how we collect, store, and track all of your exemption certificates, your existing certificates, your new certificates, how we handle the reporting and really make everything audit ready for you. And it's really customer friendly when we are collecting new exemption certificates, whether that is through the exemption link or how we can also tie into shopping carts. Another really powerful tool that I like to share on discovery calls with my customers is Avalara Tax Research. A lot of businesses have kind of, whether it's a 1, 2, 3-man shop in the accounting department, and really spend a lot of time on tax research, really looking up sales and use tax in all other states, whether it's around product or service taxability, calling the state, A lot of businesses share with me that they're just searching on Google for their answers and explanations. Avalara Tax Research takes all of the sales and use tax data in the entire country and most of the world and really simplifies it into plain language, into yes or no answers for people that are not lawyers that can understand it. And on top of that, you get access to all of our tax directors and researchers, which are mostly attorneys, that you have access to ask questions to around any taxability or service taxability and get answers back within 24 hours. A lot of customers utilize this tool in year one, but continue to use it almost as a back office kind of CPA to basically inquire about anything related to sales and use tax in any other states and other countries as well. Another very, very important product that comes up on a lot of calls, especially Sage customers, is use tax. So we have AvaTax for AP, where we're able to assist you with your use tax transactions and really assisting with collecting all of the proper information and making sure we're putting the correct use tax rates into play so that we're able to file and remit those use tax returns as well. We also have another product which is called Avalara License Management or Business License Management, where we're able to support all of our customers with their license and business portfolio. So if you're dealing with lots of permits and licenses and that you have to manage those, most times when I am going through discovery, a lot of businesses are doing that in-house on whether it's Google or Excel sheets and really don't have a good process in place for tracking and really making sure they're being compliant and getting alerts when they need to update any types of licenses or permits. And this really helps streamline that process. It's one of the added services in our suites that we'd like to discuss with our customers as well. So I appreciate everybody's time on going through Nexus and how we're able to assist with our solutions. And now you're going to get a visual of that from Rose. Thank you, Rose.
Perfect. So this is the Avalara portal. And what is important to understand here is that it is connected to your Sage system, so to your Sage Intacct or Sage 300, so that you can get real-time tax decisions. Not only do we connect to your Sage systems, but if you're using an e-commerce site or a point of sale, we also have over 1,500 pre-built integrations on that side as well. And then we've got a really robust API. So if you ever need to build your own integration, if you have an internal system that you use where there isn't a pre-built integration, we can help you on that side as well. But what we're talking about here when we're talking about these real-time tax calculations is that you are actually going to be able to go through your normal order workflow, and Avalara is working behind the scenes on the back end. So we're the logic engine making these tax decisions. When you get started with Avalara, there's some different things that we want to look for. So number one, are you registered to collect sales and use tax in this particular state? Number two, is your customer exempt? And number three, is that product or service taxable in that particular jurisdiction? So what you're going to do when you get started first is you'll go in and you'll tell Avalara, where do you collect tax? So this is how we know, hey, this is an area we need to look at, to find the right tax rate. So you'll go in, you'll select, it's a two-click process. So you'll select your states or your local jurisdictions and where you collect tax. And then we'll know that's an area we need to look out for. So that's answering that first question, are you registered there? As mentioned during the presentation that Brian went over, we're not just looking at the transactions that are coming in the states that you're registered in. We're also helping you by monitoring the other states. So those states where maybe you haven't selected Nexus in and you are not registered to collect sales and use tax yet. So on this economic threshold map, I have a demo site set up. So this is all, made up information, but it's color coded. You can see I've got yellow, Yellow is for when I'm approaching a Nexus threshold, and orange is for when I've met a Nexus threshold. You can even see the percentages of sales. So I'm way over for Minnesota. On the right, it's going to actually give you the breakdown of those different states where the threshold is met, whether it's a transaction threshold or just a sales number threshold. And then there's a report within Avalara, so you can actually run this information all the time. We also have the logic built into the map, so we're taking into account whether those states are including exempt sales into whether you've hit Nexus or not. When you hit Nexus or when you're approaching Nexus, you can also go through here. You can click a button and Avalara can register you for sales and use tax in that particular state. You can also reach out to your account manager if you've got questions on that. So make it really easy for businesses to monitor what their economic activity is using the tools that are connected with the systems that you're operating in, like Sage 300 and Sage Intacct. Let's take a look next at a transaction, and we can see some of the logic actually happening and what Avalara is looking for. So when we're connected into a system, those transactions are also getting stored over here in Avalara. You're probably not going to need to go look into this, but it is available to you as needed because this is all happening in your Sage. So you're going through your accounting system, you're invoicing, taxes getting calculated if applicable, all within that system. But as it's getting saved over here, you can see there's some key pieces of information that are getting passed. So it's going to know, what's the date because tax rates change. So Avalara keeps that information all up to date. So if there is a tax rate change, we know about it. Who's that customer? Is this customer taxable or not? Is there an exemption applied for this customer? That information is important. The ship to and ship from information. So where is this actually going? So in this example, you can see I've got a transaction that's going to Texas. And what I've done is I've put in a couple different line items just to show you how Avalara applies the correct logic depending on what you're selling. So the first option here is a software reservation software. And one of the things that Avalara does is we have thousands of different tax codes. And this ensures that the items that you're selling get the right logic applied to them across the different states. Because software, for example, has different taxability across different states. It's exempt in some states and it's taxable in others. In a state like Texas, it's actually taxable, but only up to 80%. So you can see here, while the amount is 10,000, I've only got 8,000 of it that's taxable. And once we go down on the tax details, you'll be able to see those three questions that we talked about. This is what Avalara is figuring out in those split seconds. Are you collecting here? Is the customer taxable? Is the product or service taxable? And then right underneath, we're also breaking out those local rates. So this is the power of the engine. It's knowing what the correct item rules are so that the right taxability is getting charged and that the right rates are getting applied. Also here you can see I've got a couple other line items, consulting services. That's not taxable in the state of Texas. So there's nothing taxed there. And then we've just got a general item of specialty soap. That's going to be a tangible personal property that's taxable. That's taxable at 100%. So we've got that entire amount there. So we're reading this information from Sage. We're applying the correct rules for those particular items, making sure that customer, is taxable and is not exempt, and then giving you the correct tax rates for the state and any locals that might apply. Once this transaction is a committed invoice, that's when it's going to commit over on here. And so you can run reports on this information. Avalara has over 60 different reports that you can look up to get more information about your transactions. And Avalara can also then file the returns for you. So part of the process, and you can see right here on the top, is I've got some drop downs for returns. So if Avalara were to file the returns during the initial setup, you would just tell us, hey, I'm filing in these particular states and jurisdictions, and I'm filing at this frequency. You save that information, then Avalara can apply the liability that we've calculated for you on those forms and then file those at that frequency you've requested. So because we have that information flowing into Avalara and know what those committed invoices are, we can then apply those to the correct forms, and you can go through the process and get those filed for you. Each month, we will populate the returns so you can see what your total liability is due. Right here, you can see we're in September. So this would be August liability in my demo site. We've got 36,000 that's due, but then it's broken down by each state. So you know what the total amount due is for each state. So $34 for Alabama. If I am filing in locals, I can show details and it'll actually show me those locals as well. So this takes a lot of the work out of your hands, gives you an easy way to run the reports to see what your liability is across states, and then Avalara can file that for you. Well, one of the things we spent a little bit of time on was on the exemption side. We talked about the fact that even if you work with a lot of exempt customers, you still need to be able to manage those exemption certificates. And it's really great to have an audit trail ready in case there's an audit. So let's look at an exempt transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in here. So previously on the other transaction, I showed you what it looks like when it's exemption applied and it said no. Here you can see it actually says yes. See line detail. So if I go down here, it's going to link me to that certificate. I'm going to click that, and it's going to actually take me right into that certificate within our exemption certificate management system. So here we go. We have a California resale certificate for that transaction. So that's why that customer is exempt. On the exemption side, we have an overview that allows for you to review what your compliance looks like. The goal here is going to be to make sure that your circle is green. So you can see in my example today, I've only got 44% of my valid certificates on file. So I've got a little bit of work to do. We've got tools to help you do that. You can send out automatic emails to customers where you're missing exemptions, and I'll show you what that workflow is to collect those exemptions and how easy it is for you and your customers. We also have a managed services team that can run campaigns for you to gather those certificates. So we've got the certificates on file. They're applied for that customer on the transaction, so they're exempt. But say you know you need to get another certificate for a specific customer. You can go through that process really easily. So I'm going to go down here to request certificates from customers. I'm going to go ahead and type in a customer. This is Twait & Co. And what you can see about Twait & Co. is that it looks like Twait & Co. is missing a lot of different certificates. So under here, under status, you'll see missing, missing, missing. Then we've got one that's invalid. It's invalid because it's not signed dated and there's no customer number. And then we've got a Washington one that is valid. For the two that I have, I can actually preview these through here. And you can see this Texas one doesn't have any information filled out. I'm going to go ahead and click Request a Certificate. This is going to show you some different options. These are all customizable for your business. So you can go in here, you can add your logo, you can add a personalized message, you can create templates, but let's just go ahead and use the default and we'll go ahead and send. Perfect. So this was actually sent to my email, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. So again, this says your logo here. This would be your business's logo. This messaging can be personalized for your business. And it has links to something called Cert Express. So Cert Express is our online portal to collect these exemption certificates in an easy manner for you and for your customers. So when they click on this, it's going to show you as the customer. So now I'm the customer, I'm Twait & Co. It's showing me all of the missing certificates that I need to provide my my vendor, and then it's showing me the one that I do have on file. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and fill out the Texas one. So I'm going to create it and my exempt reason. And this can actually be personalized as well. You can select the reasons that apply to your business. So we're going to say I'm a manufacturer. I'm going to click next. And here's a fantastic thing with the Cert Express. I can fill this information out online. I could also drag and drop a copy of that certificate. So I could import that copy right here. The other thing that's really fantastic is that this works on a mobile device as well as a computer. So if I was on my phone, I know a lot of our customers might be checking email on phone, they could actually fill this out via their phone. Let's go ahead and click next. And then all they need to do is write their name, their title, and then they can use these handy dandy things to sign with. Click next. So really simple for them to get you that information. That took me, what, a minute? And then it's helpful because it goes back into your customer file, and then you're going to have a valid certificate on file for Texas. So really seamless in gathering that information, makes it easy for you to send out those communications. As I mentioned, you can set up settings to automatically email those customers. We also have the logic built in that we know when those certificates expire. So some certificates last a very long time or forever. They don't have a set expiration date. And some you need to get renewed each year. So Avalara knows what the logic is for those exemptions, and then we'll help you automatically email those customers and get those set up. All right. So today we went over the calculation engine. So how Avalara reads your transactions and making sure that you're getting the right taxability for your different items. We are monitoring not just the states that you already are collecting sales tax in, but those states where you might have economic nexus and showing you that information in an easy to understand manner. Once we have calculated the correct tax for your items, we can also file those returns for you and you can run those reports. And then we can help you on the exemption side. So with your exempt customers, making sure that you have a way to easily get those certificates, manage them, and make sure you're compliant and audit ready. I think right now would be a great time to stop and answer questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Let's see, Stephen, are there any questions?
Let me check. We did have a few that came in during the presentation. One that came up, it said, my business is expanding, and I'm curious if Avalara can assist with registering us in additional states.
Fantastic. Yeah. So as I showed you in the demo, and as Brian mentioned, we work with a lot of customers on their business licenses. So specifically registering for sales and use tax, but also for all business licenses. So if you're going into a new state and you need to get registered there or apply for your business licenses, Avalara can absolutely help you.
Perfect. Thanks, Rose.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, that's where the risk assessment comes in as well. So reaching out to us after this and having an initial call where I'll explain the risk assessment. The risk assessment will truly give you that blueprint of what states that you do need to address. And that is a complete courtesy without moving forward with anything with Avalara.
Thanks, Brian. The second question that came in says, we use a third party for commerce. Do you have to integrate to Intacct or can we connect to multiple systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we talked about, Avalara does have pre-built integrations for over 1,500 different systems. And so yes, you can connect Avalara to those systems. A lot of our e-commerce solutions, you can use the Avalara system just to get the accurate tax. So you can, reach out kind of like a quote, get the accurate tax, and then you can commit through your Sage system for your committed invoices. So you can set it up however you need, but we can talk to, most systems that are being used today.
Perfect. And then it looks like there's one more question that came in. It says, does Avalara provide industry-specific solutions for hospitality?
Yes, great question. So I know that there are a lot of Sage customers that work in hospitality, and we do have solutions for hospitality specifically. We have an engine that can handle all of those tasks related to hospitality. Yes.
Perfect. And it looks like that's all the questions that we have. Um, so I'll go ahead and wrap up a little bit early. So thank you all for joining us today. If you do have any additional questions, then please contact Acumen at am@acumenfl.com. Also, please be on the lookout for webinar invites since we are planning on getting more third parties to present during our webinar series. And finally, I want to say thank you to Joel, Brian, and Rose for putting on a great presentation. We appreciate you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you guys on our next webinar Wednesday.